I became a journalist when I was 16, for example, in 1957, when I was 16 or 17. I went to Dar es Salaam for the coronation of the Aga Khan. They spent a lot of money. For this coronation of the Aga Khan, they had 2 photographers, 2 writers, and myself all flown in from around the world. The first problem in journalism for AI or with AI is truth. What is it? And you know, and you can probably do it yourself, you can create, probably out of just what I've said on this program, a convincing tape of me saying something else. This is a very disturbing and frightening, undermining thing. It's going to eradicate a lot of white-collar jobs. The safest place to be will be in a blue-collar job if you repair things. So if you're a mechanic, if you're an electrician, if you're a carpenter, a plumber, you probably are job-wise more secure in the AI world.
Hi, today I'm joined by Llewellyn King, legendary journalist, founder of the Energy Daily, and host of White House Chronicle, with more than 6 decades covering presidents, policy, and the changing face of media. Good to see you, sir, and thank you for joining the show.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Danny.
Absolutely. Well, I'll let you share your story. I've read a lot about you, but in your own words, if you can share it with the listeners, where you come from, what you did, and what's your story is about, I'd appreciate that.
I'll try that, Danny.
Today, I want to tell you about a book I'm reading. It's written by 25 veterans of the U.S. Armed Forces, all graduates of the Masters of Business for Veterans program at the University of Southern California. The book is called Veteran Stories of Transition and Transformation. It collects the personal stories of veterans written in their own words. Pick it up for yourself or a veteran you love. Check out the link in the description for 10% off.
Not all that good at talking about myself, so I'll trace it quite quickly. It's spread over a large chunk of the world. I was born in southern Rhodesia, now Zambia. And, I grew up there and went to school there. I did not go to college. I became a journalist when I was 16, and I was very fortunate because I was able to work as a correspondent for top papers in England and for Time Life magazines in the US. To be honest, I didn't work for them directly. I worked for the man who worked for them, and I ended up doing a lot of work directly for them. And of course, this was wild stuff. For example, in 1957, when I was 16 or 17, I went to Dar es Salaam for the coronation of the Aga Khan. Amazing things. That was for Life magazine. And in those days, Life magazine was like a movie company today. They spent a lot of money. For this coronation of the Aga Khan, they had 2 photographers, 2 writers, and myself all flown in from around the world. One from London, one from Rome, me from Harare, Zimbabwe, and I forget where the other fellow came from. Mine was very much the dog's body to arrange taxis, make sure they had roof racks. Anyway, all this big effort, and I got one little picture and about 4 lines of caption. That's how it worked. It was like a movie. They believed at time in those days, which was enormously wealthy, that to get that 5%, you had to put in 80%. We don't work that way anywhere now. I think for a while, of course, movies work like that, and to some extent, the big television networks, but there's less money in journalism. It doesn't work like that anymore, and it's a different world. Anyway, later on, I edited a weekly paper in Harare, then called Salisbury, which was great fun because basically I read the movie reviews, I got the news, and it was fun. And then I went to England, where I tried to get into Fleet Street and succeeded, and worked as first as a reporter and then as an editor, the copy editor on a very large newspaper, the Sunday Mirror. I think we sold 6 million copies a Sunday. And I also did some work in television, which was my introduction to television. And in those days, television in England was still really, I believe they actually had the first television broadcast ever. It's disputed, but it was probably when I was there in the early 60s, it was still black and white. They hadn't switched over to color. wasn't any different. Internally, it was more clumsy than it is today. Studios were full of, there was cable everywhere. And even in the US until about 20 years ago, the digitization of everything has reduced the number of cables lying around. But otherwise, it was basically the same. Teleprompters were hand wound, usually by girls who sat on the floor with a little device in front of the newscaster. And it was the main problem was we didn't have any immediate news because it was all film and it all came by airplane, by whatever means. And often you were waiting for film with somebody on a motorcycle would bring from London airport to the studio. So you had a lot of stories which said, things were getting back to normal today after these riots, this kind of looking backwards news, because that was what the technology allowed. And nowadays we'd have a satellite feed and it would be very different. Then in the 60s, middle 60s, I came to the US. I worked for the Herald Tribune in New York. Later I started what I fondly believe was the world's first women's liberation magazine. It didn't liberate any women. It liberated all the money I'd raised. And anyway, I came down the line looking for work and came to Washington. Went to Washington, where I worked for 3 years for the Washington Daily News on the wire desk, also as the second string theater critic, and after that I became an assistant editor at the Washington Post. Then in 1973, early in the year, in February, I started the Energy Daily. It was actually weekly for the first few months. And then with the energy prices that broke in the fall of 73, winter of 73, 74, we went daily. And I published it for 33 years. I also published Defense Week, which I started in a publication called New Technology Week. And I sold the company in 2006 and a bit after that. But 28 years ago, I started White House Chronicle on PBS, and it's still running, not on every PBS station, but on critical ones. It's on 2 stations in Washington. The audio is also on Sirius XM radio, and of course it's on the internet, moving around, I hope successfully, I don't know. I count it as a Washington television program because we have such good viewership in Washington, and most of the news that it covers. It sort of covers nowadays the intersection between technology and policy. When I started the television show, it was because I thought there weren't enough reporters. Everybody read the bylines every day, but nobody knew what they would look like. Nowadays, with cable television, everybody on it is a reporter. So we changed our program, and now we have this talk about things like artificial intelligence in society, or the impact of the batteries and smoothing out the electric supply, or the impact of government policy on renewables. It's a very large issue and rather sensitive at the moment. We do some political shows, but not as many as we once did, although politics is always there. It's very hard to get away from politics. We're talking about artificial intelligence. Next thing you're talking about regulation. That's a political issue, etc. One other thing which I left out was my wife, Linda Gasparella, a very gifted journalist. For 6 years, we did a stock market show. I didn't start it or own it or anything. It was on cable. It was called The Bull and the Bear. Humorously, we said it was all the bull and not the bear.
Well, that's an amazing story, and again, thank you for spending this time with me and sharing this. And you touched artificial intelligence, and by profession, I am a software engineer, and I specialize on AI. And you, as a person who worked in media for many decades, and you saw the evolution of this, how do you see AI? And its impact on journalism, and maybe you can even predict how the future of journalism will look like with artificial intelligence.
Well, the thing to remember, Danny, is journalism is in trouble. There isn't the money. The advertising that used to support the newspapers and the television, many other things, essentially all went to the internet. It's a lot more efficient, a lot more accurate if you want to, and you can advertise that can really nail the potential customer in a way that magazines and newspapers were very shotgun. Now they've got a rifle. The impact of AI is very hard to determine in any field because we're grasping it so quickly. I like what my friend Omar Hatameh, who was till very recently the chief AI officer at Goddard Space Center, he said, you've got to remember that it's exponential and we think in a linear way. So you can see that we don't keep up. We try to guess to the future. The first problem in journalism for AI or with AI is truth. What is it? And you know, and you can probably do it yourself, you can create, probably out of just what I've said on this program, a convincing tape of me saying something else. This is a very disturbing and frightening, undermining thing. On the other hand, it is going to give us the ability to do a lot of instant research, to cross-check things, but the problem is truth. The veracity of what we're covering, its provenance, is much harder to determine than it used to be. I'll give you an example. Several years ago, I was at the Association of European Journalists meeting in Lithuania, and some of the local reporters came to me, I suppose because they're a bit older and been around, and said, what can we do? We cover things like a demonstration, pinheads, creating trouble. We photograph them, we interview them, we write about them, we publish the photograph. Then we learn later that they were not skinheads, that they were Russian agents pretending to be skinheads, Edward. And this happens continuously. There are about 2,000 people who work in a building in Moscow purely putting out disinformation. And we have to, in the end, that AI can in some way police the disinformation, that we can produce with AI tools to correct the excesses of AI. If you like to think of it this way, maybe we can get some degree of policing of AI by AI. I don't think we're going to do it in any other way. And it may be possible we can establish ways that AI will check on the truth of things, check on the veracity. And of course, truth is very hard to come by. If two people watch the same thing, they'll do a different report on it, which is why, historians are constantly arguing about what happened. If there's one standard thing you can say about history, is people don't agree. The broad outline, we know that William the Conqueror landed in Britain in 1066, but we don't know much else. We know roughly how many men the Brits had and how many men the French had. Very small numbers, actually. But we don't know whether they were well received, whether they were quickly integrated into the society they conquered. We don't know about a lot, which is why you have, for example, Marxist historians. What is that? That's an interpretation of history. And but AI will help us try to establish in some way what is true. In the interim, it is contributing an enormous amount of information that isn't true, that is disinformation or misinformation, which is a continuing problem. It's always a problem in journalism, but it is a problem that is never resolved totally. It is now a larger problem than it ever has been. And, used to be we knew when we got something. Also, technology has undermined truth in other ways. It used to be that if you, say, as a reporter, went up to the Congress and somebody had a letter they wanted you to see, they would show it to you and you had to copy it out by hand yourself. There were no Xerox machines. Then you had Xerox machines, so you never saw the original letter. There's room for manipulation now. And nowadays, of course, you'd get it on the web. And you wouldn't really have any way of establishing, it's as they say in the art world, it's provenance, what its origin is. AI is going to be very confusing in journalism for a long time. In India, I understand they're using as the newscasters bots They look like nice people who will ask questions, as you ask me questions. They will ask questions of live people. This I find very scary. But there's a lot about I'm both excited and scared by AI. I think it's going to do amazing things in medicine, in all sorts of things, in engineering and science, and I think it's also going to be very damaging till we understand its dimensions and we know how to guard against its weaknesses or its fallibilities. We know about hallucinations, and there are things we don't know. We don't know how these neural networks really interface. We don't know why there's a tendency. The Economist magazine has written very brilliantly about this, but why AI tends to want to please people. It has a predilection for pleasing people. Nobody quite understands that. So it's likely to tell you what it thinks you want to hear in a hallucinatory way. And that's very difficult to deal with. I'm not a mathematician, I'm not a computer person, so I can only see the end results or guess at the end results. I think the arrival of AI agents, which I'm glad to say I was able to write about before they were generally known about, it's going to be huge. And this is before we get to general AI. This is a large language model agents, which can sound very seductive. And the one that's used is if you have a travel agent, they will know what you can afford. They'll know what you like to eat, where you like to go, and they will plan your whole vacation for you, book it, use your credit card, pay for it, etc. That's the sort of upside of it. But the downside is if the agents start talking to each other, or if one of them is malicious, if somebody employs an agent to damage somebody else, and the software is written to damage someone, we don't know the limits of that. We don't know how we would identify it, and certainly we don't know how we would correct it. And it is very difficult on the web anyway to correct misinformation or malicious information. It's going to be infinitely harder with AI, where there is no, if I write something in the newspaper or on television, I say something that's patently wrong or full of malice or designed to hurt somebody, they have an option. First, they can write to me, they can sue me, they can sue the station, or they can sue the newspaper. Mostly, probably by going over my head in some way, they'll get satisfaction. But when it comes to things on the web, things generated by AI, there is no appellate procedure. Think of it, newspapers, you call the editor, you write to the publisher, you sue them. These are appellate procedures to correct inaccuracies or malice or perceived malice. We don't have that, and we don't know. We also, AI is standing intellectual property on its head. If, for example, what I'm saying to you today is picked up by AI and incorporated into something, which is quite possible, you are not going to get any residual profit from it. You're not going to get a paycheck or even a sliver of money, which you might if it was on television or in the newspaper. So writers, broadcasters, etc., have no protection of their intellectual property. And the court cases are going against them. The big newspapers are suing the internet companies, the AI companies, which are also most of the internet companies. But there are a lot of interesting and open issues now. I do not see how the AI companies are going to make money. They're spending billions, literally billions of dollars, and they don't have a business plan as to how they're going to make money. On the internet, they made money with advertising. That's pretty straightforward. You can all understand that. But that doesn't work with AI. So they talk, at least this is what I've heard, maybe you've heard differently, Danny, that they talk about maybe using a subscription or a paywall. And that may not work, and it may not be ideal, because somebody else presumably can get the same material with their AI and get around your paywall. but it also is very exclusionary. A paywall is very exclusionary. It says to an awful lot of people, you can't have this information. And it's doing, I think, damage in newspapers by concentrating everybody's investment, subscriptions on the big papers, like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, are much richer than any other. They're richer than the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times or the Chicago Tribune, because more people have made the decision that they'll get better value from the New York Times. And this is a kind of first past the post reality that I think would hurt the AI companies if they go to it. And I don't think it'll work because I think somebody will be using AI out of China or out of India or somewhere else. It is all so new and it is just the beginning. We have no idea. It is going to have huge impact, excuse me, on our society. It's going to eradicate a lot of white collar jobs. The safest place to be will be in a blue collar job if you repair things. You can say to me, well, that's dangerous because we'll have robots that can do it. For example, in hotels, you'll have a robot making beds. No, you won't. It'd be a very expensive machine and it probably would never pay to do it. But so if you're a mechanic, if you're an electrician, if you're a carpenter, a plumber, you probably are job-wise more secure in the AI world than you are if you've been an analyst or a writer. Lawyers are very affected by it. We've seen some of the biggest hallucinations, maybe almost ludicrous hallucinations in law firms, where non-existent cases have been cited by the AI, conclusions have been reached by the AI, and this is very scary stuff. And I'd be really interested to know what you think about it, Dan.
Yeah, well, in some perspectives, probably in most perspectives, you know about it much better than I do in terms of application to different fields, especially in journalism, but not only that. From the technical perspective, from what I see, from what I hear from other machine learning experts or scientists who develop these algorithms, it seems like there is no consensus on where it's going to go. Like there might be like a million AI engineers and a million opinions on how it's going to impact our lives. So it's very hard to predict. In terms of journalism, though, what I do see is it's getting much more chaotic, especially, let's say, young people like me. They use Instagram, YouTube, and you never know whether a video you're watching is real or not, especially if it's a politician saying something or something along those lines. And I, as a young person who knows ins and outs of AI, can't recognize that. That means that no one's probably safe from that. And some of my friends are working on some tools to recognize that. They're not there yet. And I suspect that publishers like New York Times, Washington Post, others, I think they might be the only sources of truth in the future where you never know what's true on the internet and you can only trust people or organizations that
It's
you
going to
know.
make a few certifiable publications very important. In London, there's an organization called the Institute for Strategic Studies. I don't know how it is today, but it used to be looked on throughout the defense community as the place where you got accuracy, where you found out how many Russian divisions there really were and how well equipped they really were. That kind of thing. And the problem of nailing down hard information is going to increase. In some ways, it should be easier because we have AI, but in fact, it's going to be harder. And you're right. I think that's very interesting what you said. You're going to have a few sort of known truth tellers, or as close as you can get. Because remember, all journalism is subjective, even though we try. The best you can do as a journalist is to be fair, Danny. And let me give you a little crude example. If a bus turns out that we're in the street and 3 people die and there are 40 on board, and you look at it and you say, that's a tragedy. 3 people died. And somebody else might look at it and say, that's a miracle. 40 people were saved. it's the same event. It's a matter of how you look at it. And that's always true. I mean, that's never not been the case in journalism, which is why we have those disputes in history. Because remember, journalism is the first cut of history, and it's very interesting. And people do put their own views, whether they try not to or not. So I always say, try to be fair. It's about as close as you can get, and you'll probably be pretty objective if you're fair. But to try to be objective is very difficult. It won't necessarily make you fair. It maybe sounds splitting hairs to you, but it makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, before we finish the episode, before we wrap up our conversation, do you have some kind of message or advice for young people, maybe in their early 20s, something that you want to share with them?
Yeah, I think I do. I think the first thing, I read a lot of books, and I'm always interested in that point where people start out, when they know where they want to be or think they do. And one of the great things, I've just read Barry Diller's book, the man who really was a big force in movies and television, that kind of book. But always, I think the thing that you have to fight against is fearing rejection. And if you're going to do anything creative, you're going to get a lot of rejection. You're going to be a writer or a painter, even if that matter, if you're going to be an engineer. An awful lot of engineers do not have their initial ideas accepted by their peers. There's a lot of groupthink in everything. There's a lot of siloing. So prepare to be rejected. The other thing is the importance of one person. Really, to move things forward, it usually takes one person in love, in a job, business. So just remember that and look for people who tend to say yes and not people who say no. And there are an enormous number of things that are just happenstantial. You're obviously got a better chance in life if you're born in the US or in Western Europe than if you're born, say, in a third world country, in most of Africa, if you're born in Sudan or even in my homeland. It's very hard, very hard. Poverty is a truly terrible thing, and it holds people back, and it crushes their expectation. It crushes their hope. You've got to keep your expectations high, keep your hope high, and ignore rejection. The next person will say yes. And build your life with yes people. And be one yourself. Give people a chance. You will succeed because people give you a chance. And when you get an opportunity, go for it. There's a saying that Steve Jobs had, which I liked very much. He was working with an engineer, and they were putting together cell phones, not a couple, but putting together something. And the wiring was messy. And the engineer said, well, it doesn't matter. Nobody's going to see it. And Jobs said, but I will know. The other thing, which is related, which is he would say to people, you can do it. Don't be afraid. He would say it about an engineering problem or about life. You can do it. Don't be afraid. And I think that that's what you have to say to yourself. And my advice to young people is know who you are, know your own worth, and don't let other people convince you otherwise.
Thank you for sharing your story, your perspectives on AI and advice. I truly appreciate this. Yeah, great time. Thank you, sir.
Super, Danny. Take care of yourself.